Hello and good morning or good afternoon if you are on the U.S. East Coast or perhaps overseas or somewhere else in the world. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We are very excited to have you join us for today's session. We have a great hour or about 45 minutes ahead, and very excited to jump into things. So first, I want to start off by pulling up a slide deck of sorts just to guide our conversation today. So scaling business travel from ad hoc visa requests to a strategic program. And joining me today are my two awesome colleagues, starting first with Ashok Sharma, the VP Operations Global Visas and Consular Services here at Envoy Global. Ash is a seasoned operations leader with over 15 years of experience in immigration and visa services. He has led high-performing service delivery teams across global organizations, driving excellence in business visa and consular operations. Also joining us today is Peter Kirch-Gessner, Director, Strategic Partnership and Sales, Global Visas and Consular Services here at Envoy Global. Peter is a global mobility and travel operations leader with more than 20 years of experience managing high-volume visa passport and consular support programs worldwide. At Envoy Global, he partners with mobility teams and travel managers to optimize international travel processes, aligning travel management strategy with real-world embassy and consular execution to deliver a smoother, more predictable employee experience. Ash and Peter, thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
So moving on to a few housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered, including all attendees, will receive a copy after today's live session via email. I'll aim to get that into everyone's inbox before the end of the week. Generally, I do some light editing after the live session, so need a few, about a day or two for that. That email will come from Envoy Global, so please keep an eye out for that. Additionally, we highly encourage audience participation. Ask us questions. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a chat feature that you can type your question in. Myself, Peter, and Ash have full access to that, so we'll be monitoring that, and we'll perhaps address a question throughout the discussion, or we'll save it for the dedicated Q&A session. Please keep in mind, however, that if it's a very specific question that is perhaps legal in nature, that we will not be able to address that live on this broadcast. We definitely recommend speaking to a qualified professional for more information if we are unable to address your question. And finally, myself, Peter, and Ash are all in different parts of the world. I am in Chicago, Peter is out in Sacramento, and Ash is currently in France. And so please excuse any buffering or lag that you might see or experiencing. We'll do our best to clean that up in the editing session, but if things are a little bit off, it's likely due to internet, so apologies in advance. Alrighty, Ash and Peter, that's gonna bring us into the main part of our conversation today. And so we have a light slide deck just to kind of help guide the conversation. So first, part one, setting the scene, the evolution of business travel. And Peter, I want to start with you and kind of want to start broad. Why is this such a live topic right now? Companies, have had business travel obligations for a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. This really isn't a new obligation. Companies have always had to, they've always been on the hook to keep business travel compliant. What's really changed is the flexibility to be casual about visa compliance.
Nice. And Ash, is there a real world example that shows this playing out right now that maybe you can spotlight?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the big one that comes to mind that anyone, I'm in France today, traveling into Europe, if anyone's done that over the last sort of 4 to 6 months, will have noticed the kind of rollout of the EU's entry-exit system, or the EES, as it's called. It's rolled out across 29 Schengen countries. It's been a kind of phased implementation. And on the face of it, it looks relatively straightforward that you're replacing passport stamps with, biometric registration, fingerprints, and kind of biometric recognition. And I think what we're seeing from a headline perspective in the news is, travel disruption, border delays, people missing flights. But I think what's getting far less attention, which is critical in our industry, and what we need to be thinking about as businesses that travel, is what the EES is enabling the governments to do, and that's effectively to catch overstays and to have a greater monitoring of people that are coming into the Schengen area. And a statistic that's pretty highlights the impact of that already is that as of May, there's been over 9,000 travellers that have been denied entry after it's been flagged that they've overstayed the validity of whether that's a visa or their visa exemption. So it's a real world example of how business travel compliance is impacting travellers day to day, and it's something that it needs to really be looked at. And it's broadly part of a move within the kind of business travel space of governments having more restrictions and looking at more ways of monitoring people. So it's something we really need to be acutely aware of.
Definitely. You mentioned that one stat as of May 26th, as you just mentioned, almost 9,000 people had already been denied entry after being flagged for overstaying the permitted time. Do you have like a ballpark estimate of what that was in the past, maybe like a year or two ago?
So it's a little bit difficult to tell just because it's kind of the stats, and that's more broadly. Obviously, there wasn't a kind of way of monitoring it effectively. It was, passport officer having to go through, hundreds of stamps potentially with people that travel into and out of Europe from, close by countries. But it's more a kind of high level overview of, this is really impacting, and that's just going to grow as the countries start to do more and more tracking and kind of catch individuals that may, and I think one of the key things is, it's not just business travel, it's also your leisure travel. It's any travel into the Schengen area. And I think that's what's also starting to catch people out, because people have, second homes. They may be, doing business meetings in several countries, and that accumulative days can really put you at risk and put your business at risk.
Got it. So, Peter, it's fair to say that this isn't an isolated case and it's part of a bigger pattern?
Yeah, not at all. If you zoom out from that one system, governments are really leaning harder on AI and automated screening and things like that than they were 5 or 6 years ago. So they're able to see it in real time and catch those overstays. So it's changed quite a bit.
Well, I guess speaking of the 5 or 6 years ago, which is already crazy to think about and how fast time is flying.
Yeah.
How does that compare to how this used to work?
Well, pre-COVID, a lot of these questions and compliance issues ran through a phone call. If you remember the phone, right? One contact, one relationship. Compliance was all handled through conversations. So that gave companies a natural human-to-human checkpoint. The nuances of the trip, they were discussed on the phone. So I remember taking when I was in operations side, multiple conversations would happen about one trip. And so you would get these intricacies of what this person was actually doing on their trip. And so you could catch that compliance right then and there. So things have changed quite a bit since then, obviously.
So then, Peter, I'm curious on the company side, has that checkpoint gone away too?
Mostly it has, yeah. Booking is decentralized now. Employees book their own travel. Teams operate independently across regions. So it's not easy for a company to know, who's traveling where until after the fact. I hear all the time from travel managers and folks in travel that they don't know their true volume. They have multiple providers across the world. And, I have a lot of DIY. We're hearing that regularly. So keeping that in check is difficult.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get into some solutions later in the conversation, but before we get there, Ash, I'm curious. So where does that leave us as we head into the middle part of our conversation?
So it's a tricky part for businesses trying to manage this, because you've got the two shifts. So you've got ease, but you've also got more compliance and more checks and more digital ways of looking at those kind of things. So effectively, it boils down to, it's never been easier to travel, but it's also never been easier to get it wrong. And I think that's critical. And that's kind of where we want to discuss some of the implications of what getting it wrong means in the next part.
Yeah. And before we get to that next part, actually, I want to run a poll for our audience. So before I launch it, I just want to read the question, and then everyone will have a chance to hear it, and then you'll see it pop up on your screen. So before I launch it, the question that we're curious to learn more about is, how does your company currently track international business travel? All right, and so I'm going to launch this poll. It should pop up on your screen. I cannot see the poll on my side, only the behind the scenes parts. So if you don't see it, let me know. But I'm fingers crossed. It looks like we got some responses coming in. The answer options are centralized system, spreadsheet, or manual tracking. We honestly don't have full visibility, and then not sure. So we'll let that poll run a few seconds, and then Ash and Peter, I will read the results out loud. Alrighty, we'll give that about another 5 seconds. Okay, so poll's over. Thank you all for participating. Again, Ash and Peter, the question we asked was, how does your company currently track international business travel? 44% said centralized system. 30% said we honestly don't have full visibility. 17% said not sure. And 9% said spreadsheet or manual tracking. What are your immediate reactions to the poll?
I think from my perspective, not surprised, from the conversations we have with clients, we know it's really difficult as a business to figure out how you get your arms around this. And, we'll talk about some of the genuine kind of challenges with that. So I'm not surprised, there isn't a perfect solution out there. There's ways you can address some of these. But yeah, it's not uncommon from what we hear, talking to clients day in, day out.
I'm happy
Peter?
to see that only 9% are using spreadsheets. So that's great.
Nice. Alrighty, well, let's go on to the next part of our conversation, part 2, the realities. And so I want to talk, Ash, about what this actually, looks like day to day. You mentioned kind of like this paradox of sorts. So I'm hoping to dive into this a little bit more. How would you describe where things stand right now?
I think paradox is the perfect example. It's a genuine contradiction. What we've seen kind of even before COVID and post COVID is that business travel has become easier than ever. And when I say that, it's from kind of two perspectives. One is booking. We've seen the growth of online travel tools, TMCs moving to much more self-serve from a traveler perspective. You can now book a flight, hotel, your car, all within a few clicks and have confirmations in seconds, which, before potentially that was a phone call, you had to speak to your travel provider. So it's easier to get traveling than ever. But on the other hand, you've got shifts in the business visa world. So you've got more oversight, like we talked about, things such as the EES. You've got a shift to digital visas. So you've had a lot of countries have moved from kind of traditional paper visas or no visas to some form of entry requirement, whether that be an e-visa, whether electronic travel authorization. And all of that means that the whole traveler journey has become much more traveler-led. And that kind of means that there's potentially risk there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've also seen, in contradiction to that, in some destinations, we've also seen a move to more enhanced screening when it comes to the visa process. So when we look at things like biometric appointments, in-person appointments, biometric collection, kind of stricter entry requirements. So you've kind of got this contradiction between travel's never been easier, and to some countries it's even easy from a business travel and visa perspective, but others it's also getting difficult. And again, like we said, there's a catch here. The easy is great for the traveler, but it can really be a minefield for the business when they come to manage this. So there's much less oversight and less control over who's going where and whether that trip is actually compliant. So it is a real conundrum for businesses and how to get their arm around it. And, looking at the poll, it's clear that there is a challenge there, and there isn't a kind of a quick fix to this, but we'll hope to provide some solutions.
Yeah. It reminded me, I was speaking with our colleague Florent last week, and I think he was doing some travel in Europe, and he was saying, I think for the first time in hundreds of business trips, he had to provide biometrics and an interview. And like, I think they just hearing his own personal story, and then just hearing what you're saying, just kind of that personal, right, just backs it up. So Peter, when you're talking with industry colleagues and other individuals and companies, what are you what is what Ash just said? You know, does that match with what you're hearing in those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. Ash explained it well. Both of those things are true, can be true for the same trip. It's streamlined on one side and it's really, really complicated on the other side. So, it's not a knock on that system. It's really just the environment we're all working through today, right? It's changed quite a
Yeah,
bit.
definitely. So Ash, what does that mean, like practically, for how companies should plan?
So it just means planning more and not less, really, and it's so much more critical that planning starts as early as possible. Now, we appreciate business travel is often last minute and there's always urgent requirements, but if you can build planning into your program, it really helps. One of the biggest ones is when we talked about this kind of increase in biometric kind of requirements. A lot of governments have not staffed up appropriately to manage that volume. So what's the knock-on effect of that? We see huge delays in terms of wait for visa appointments. For some consulates in some countries, you're talking waits of 6, 9, 12 months. So it's about really understanding, is there a way you can predict where travel is going to be to try and have a strategic view on, can we get ahead of this? And that's where having the right partner in place can kind of guide you through that. And then the other thing is, because it's very much kind of quick and fast, it's about planning from a compliance perspective as well, not just a visa. So it's ensuring that you've got the right controls in place, you have the right assessment tools in place that are enabling you to review, what the activities of someone that's going to travel are, understand what the compliance risks are, and be able to react to those. Because again, if, for example, it's not necessarily a straightforward business trip, that could be a permit, and there could be wait times for you to be able to enable that or that type of authorization. So again, it's all about planning and it's understanding all of those levers. I think one of the other key things is, if you run a decentralized program, that can cause challenges in terms of you're trying to, aggregate things from all of your providers, from all of your countries, and it's much harder to get a grip of kind of how to manage that and understand, broadly speaking, stepping back and looking at your business travel plan, how do I impact this and how do I get my arms around this?
So I would say both of you are kind of hitting on this idea of that, it's easier to get in trouble. As you mentioned, it's so much easier for the traveler to move about, but then for the company, they have to monitor that and make sure they're in compliance. So, but I want to dive into this idea a little bit more. This, easier to get in trouble. And Peter, walk me through kind of like what you've been referring to and exactly a little bit more of what you mean.
Yeah, when a business trip goes wrong on the compliance side of things, it's really not just the traveler's problem. So there are really three parties that get exposed. So the traveler, obviously, on the ground at the border, the company that's sending the traveler, and then this also includes the host company. So all three can be on the hook, I guess, for the compliance issue or not being in compliance.
So let's start with the traveler. So Ash, what's at stake for them if they get in trouble?
So, I mean, best case is that you end up with a disrupted trip, a missed meeting, they're potentially is going to have business impact on you. If we take the really extreme end, which can happen, is that, they get denied entry, they're potentially deported, there's fines, and you can also end up with lengthy entry bans from, those countries or blocks of countries, depending on how that operates going forward. So it can be super disruptive in terms of how somebody would travel in the future, as well as an immediate impact to your trip.
And for the company that sent them, what are some potential repercussions, or how might they
Yeah.
get in trouble?
So on a compliance issue on this trip doesn't always stay contained, right? So it can create problems for the company sending future employees to that same country. You could see more denials, getting banned for future trips. I'm sure, I think Ash and I have seen a wide range of issues surrounding these single trip problems, turning into bigger issues for everybody involved. So it's not just the deal that's going on today or today's client meeting. it's future business that's on the line. So it can
it.
be a big mess.
Yeah. And I know when we were prepping for this webinar, one thing that I appreciated learning, and I thought I didn't know, was that, and you just mentioned a few seconds ago, was that the third party, the host company, can also get into trouble. So Ash, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think when we think about business travel, you've got, I work for this company, I'm traveling here. That's kind of it really and often that's all that's required. Those two decision makers from the traveler and the sending entity are the ones that can make the decision. But I think what we forget is there is a third entity in this. Now, as Peter mentioned, this could be a third party vendor that you're going to visit because you're doing business or you're working there. It could also be your own office that you're visiting while you're traveling on business. And generally, the inviter is the one that the local government authority is potentially able to action, because a foreign entity, it's less impactful for that government to be able to access them, but they do have access to that entity. So whether that's your vendor or it's your own internal office, you've got to be really careful around that. And if you travel non-compliant, you can have issues around that. I think one of the biggest risks that we've seen in practice is around the ability of an individual traveler, non-compliant business traveler, to actually impact your own entity's ability to sponsor workers. So, thinking about our mobility teams, they might not necessarily know about business travel that's happening into a particular country that they manage because it's managed by another part of the business, it's the sending entity, or they're even visiting a vendor. So it wouldn't even be on their radar because it's from one entity to a vendor. But there have been instances where effectively an individual has been caught traveling non-compliantly on business. That's then led to potentially the suspension or cancellation of their local license to sponsor employees, because effectively the government could view that as you're employing someone illegally in that country. And obviously that can have a huge repercussions for a business, whether or not operating that country, individuals are already sponsored on that license. It can impact their status. So it really is critical that the holistic view of business travel compliance is looked at across the entity, whether you're sending employees between your offices or to visit vendors or, other individuals that you're doing business with.
Yeah. So kind of hearing that, I mean, at least to me, hearing that, it sounds like this is really a shared risk situation between companies. Is it fair to say that, Peter?
It sure is. Yeah, this is between all of the entities. So two companies can be impacted by one traveler's paperwork problem, and fines. That's a financial issue, but they're country specific, so the risks are different everywhere you operate. Right? So one country handles it completely different than another.
Yeah. What might some of those fines look like? I mean, even if just like ballpark estimates.
Ash, do you have that kind of information?
Some countries it's tens of thousands of dollars. In some instances, it can even be a percentage of your kind of turnover. So we could be talking really significant. And there's a whole history of kind of pretty large, significant multi-million-dollar fines for certain companies that have sent people in on business travel that potentially they've been doing a little bit more than that, and that's what's caused the issue there.
This might be my business development brain talking, but the impact of being able to do future business seems to be a pretty big risk to take.
So you mentioned Ash, I think you kind of hinted at this idea, kind of the rogue traveler problem internally. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that one or that idea a little bit more, I should say.
Yeah, definitely. So like we talked about with the third party, business visitors, contractors who normally kind of fall outside the travel system or the mobility system. It's not that they're being difficult. It's just that they booked outside the process, and often the tools that they have at their disposal enable them to do that. And a lot of the time you often only realize once that trip's happened, and that could mean that you've already had an impact on your business. And that's where the exposure sits. And actually, historically, we talked about some of those large fines for non-compliance. The culprit is almost always a business traveler that's triggered the authorities to look further into a company. It's never a sponsored worker pretty much, because that's something that is, very well handled by the mobility teams. They're usually using an immigration or a legal partner that's looking at all of this. It's this casual business travel, which is where a lot of companies get into trouble. And it generally is the key kind of one that starts the issue around that.
Got it. Before we move on, that wraps up our second section, by the way. But before we move on, just wanted to, Peter and Ash just want to take a quick pause here before we head into our third and final section and then audience Q&A. To our attendees, if you do have a question for Ash and Peter, go ahead and type it into the chat, and we'll do our best to address it before the end of today's webinar. Alrighty, so Ash and Peter, we started with kind of looking at the scene, setting the scene of business travel, how it's evolved over time, and then the section that we just wrapped up are just kind of the current day realities. Now I want to move on to the solutions and what our attendees should be looking for, and what a provider should bring. So, given everything that we've covered, Peter, I'll start with you. What should companies actually look for in a provider?
Well, it's a handful of things, and they really build on each other. There's so much that goes into this. Ash, maybe you can start with your view on that from the operations side.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's the view that they bring to compliance. So you need a provider that has a view on compliance, not just someone that's going to process, whatever paperwork lands at their desk. And I think, the landscape has changed, and you need a provider that's got that view from both sides. So they understand the business travel, but they also understand the potential compliance impacts of non-compliant business travelers.
Oh yeah, Ash, I was actually just going to ask, if you can elaborate more on like a view of compliance and exactly what you're referring to. But it sounds like they understand both sides of it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Definitely, yeah. So it's either having that immigration and mobility view. So whether that's a part of the organization that understands immigration, is immigration experts, can connect the dots between the two. But again, you don't just want an immigration provider, because they won't understand some of the nuances of business travel. So it really is having the expertise on both sides that are really partnering internally to kind of seamlessly provide that to the client and to the end traveler. But yeah, there's nuances on both sides. And I think if you have a program that's leveraged too far one way or the other, it potentially impacts doing business, because there are certain things that need to be, considered from both sides.
Got it. So Peter, it sounds like going off of what Ash said is that, expertise matters here. And it almost sounds like business travel has like its own rhythm to it.
It does. It has to be the right type of expertise. So business travel does have its own pace and rhythm. It's high frequency, short timelines, constant movement. It's really fast, right? I always talk about it as like we're in the emergency room of travel, right? So provider needs to understand that environment first. And then they need to bring deep immigration expertise to the table when that support's needed. It's got all of those components.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a pretty good segue into the kind of like the next thing that a provider, should offer. And given where we are, 2026 technology, I think that's kind of a must, right? So, Ash, what does good technology look like?
I think like Peter's kind of alluded to, the cadence and the rhythm of business travel is very much about speed. That's what people get traveling, and especially like we talked about, a number of times about the evolution of the booking tools. So I think the challenge with the last minute booking means you need a provider and you need technology to enable that. So you need a compliance assessment tool that's super quick and fast and almost instant. Anything that's too slow can actually lead to the traveler just trying to route around it and figure it out on their own. And that's obviously a huge risk to the business. Myself and Peter have both seen kind of firsthand when people try to kind of DIY it. So, we've all seen search engines provide their own AI summaries now. that can be really challenging. We see how it kind of can mix messages from different governments. It's all firsthand. It kind of comes across. And if they take that face value and it turns out to be wrong, that can have a huge impact from that perspective. But saying as much as we leverage speed, it can't come at the cost of compliance. So it's finding that balance between the two, and a provider who understands the nuances and the speed about business travel, but also how to make business travel compliant quickly. That's key.
Yeah. Ash, I know you just mentioned AI. Obviously, it is a growing part of our personal and professional lives. And you just mentioned like the Google AI overviews, right, where it just kind of provides that information at the top. And so there is a lot of talk around AI and the various LLMs out there. And companies are obviously incorporating that tech into their own platforms and services. So, Peter, what's your take on AI in this space right now?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. The technology can't mean AI chat and nothing else, right? So a generic AI assistant fielding complex visa questions with no experienced human behind it will produce a mixed bag of compliance risk, right? So you will get errors, you will get, it's just, you need the human touch behind it. The tech has to be fast, it has to be easy to use, but it needs a human behind it, not instead of it. We've all played around with these AI chats in the visa side of things, and we can break them every day, right?
Oh, Ash, anything that you would add on that?
I think Peter hit the nail on the head there. Really, it's there's useful ways that it can be built into a program, but I think the challenge is a lot of the nuance and that human view that Peter says. A lot of the information around what you can and can't do and various other things, it actually comes from touch points on the ground. It's talking to governments, it's talking to embassies, it's having that in-country presence. A lot of it isn't published. So actually, if you rely on just what's out there, on the internet, and that's what a lot of the AI kind of models can do, they miss a key piece of the business travel world, which is that, the consulate at the end of the day is the one that's going to make certain decisions on your visa applications. So I think that can be a really key piece of the kind of puzzle that can get missed if you solely rely on those type of tools.
Got it. The next thing that I wanted to ask both of you about in terms of what companies should look for in a provider, and I want to tie it back to the poll that we asked minutes ago. No, a few minutes ago, but it was actually probably like 20 minutes ago. So if you recall, we asked, how does your company currently track international business travel? So I want to ask both of you on reporting and kind of what that looks like. So what should Ash, start with you? What should companies, when they're looking at providers, what should companies expect visibility into?
So, the basics should be there by default without kind of having to ask. So you obviously know what you're spending. It's important that you've got visibility over, what your vendor's procuring for your travelers in terms of visa types, where they're being issued, how long they're being issued for, so you can both manage cost and understand how your program is evolving, and you can look at strategically with your partner about how to manage that. A clear view of activity across that population as well. So like we talked about, it's not just about where they go, it's why they go. And I think that's critical. And also looking at things like understanding visa expirations. We're used to, in the mobility world, tracking that very tightly because we have an action. But actually on the business traveler world, it's also critical to try and track that, because you can look at intercepting when that's expiring. You might need to review those activities. There can sometimes be an assumption that, hey, I've been doing this for the last year, therefore I should be able to do it again. That could be a really timely intervention to be able to say, actually, we need to review what you're doing for this next year before we go ahead and issue that visa. And actually using that visa expiration can be a really key way to do it. And then obviously just an ongoing review and assessment of your program and strategically looking at that and managing it. And I think the other thing that's key is all of that reporting needs to roll up globally. Having a single provider that kind of consolidate all of that for you across every country you operate is key. If you're trying to manage a patchwork of different providers, you might have local providers in certain markets. it leaves you trying to piece that together, and inevitably that's going to lead to gaps, and that's where your exposure could lie. So I think trying to bring that all into one managed consolidated program is key for any global international business.
Got it. Peter, anything you would add on that? Or?
Yeah, two things. Ash hit on them though, but centralized data, so nobody's guessing who's traveling where, and then genuine global reach. So the program holds up whether you're traveling to one country or 20 countries. And I really like what Ash said about the visa expiration, tracking. That hasn't always traditionally been the case in business visas, and it's almost mandatory. You have to do it because of the AI that governments are using to track where people are and how. Really important.
Definitely. Alrighty, well, that's going to bring us to our key takeaways. It's hard to believe that we're already at this endpoint. So, yes, Ash, I'll start with you. What are as we wrap up the main conversation for today? What are your what would you recommend are your key takeaways?
I think that if you take one thing from this discussion from me, I think it's that the tools that enable business travel have changed faster than most programs have, and inevitably with AI, that pace of change is increasing, exponentially, and it's going to be really hard to keep up. But that gap is where the risk lives for a business, both on the traveler, for the company, and whoever they're visiting. So I think it's just considering all of those and understanding that. That's my takeaway, I think, Eric.
Yeah,
nice, appreciate it. Peter, what would you say your takeaways are for today?
Yeah, well, if any of what we covered here today sounds familiar, tracking visas and spreadsheets, finding out about a trip after it's happened, struggling to get reports from your vendors, we built our platform, our business visa platform, to close those gaps. So we'd love the chance to, show you how it works if you're interested in that. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah. Awesome. And if you are interested, let us know. Please reach out to Peter. Email is on the screen, and more than happy to discuss further with you. Alrighty, so that's going to bring us to our audience Q&A portion of the session. Real quick, looks like yes, thank you for the question, Regina. Yes, this the video as well as the slides will be emailed out. I just need to do some light editing on the video afterwards, so you can expect that recording before the end of the week, and it'll be sent to everyone who registered. Alrighty, so for questions, let's start with this one, and maybe Peter, you can take this one. How does this differ from just using our TMC's preferred vendor?
That's a good question. It certainly depends on the vendor, but this to me is really about partnering with the vendor that understands your business, so the nuances of your business, as well as the new landscape of how governments are tracking people in and out of countries. So it's gone from kind of a transactional type of business, that these aren't one-off transactions anymore. So it's important to keep that in line.
Got it. Kind of thinking back to the question that we had about how reporting and or tracking and things of that sort. So what does implementation actually look like for a company moving off of spreadsheets?
That's a good question. Peter, start
with you then, Ash.
Yeah, we're really fast at working with new clients, to understand their operation and their traveler population and where they're traveling to, what they're doing in those regions. And, like we've talked about quite a bit, that the platform handles the data, it handles the tracking, handles the reporting. And then from a human side, we can customize our service to really work and match with what the client's doing and what their business needs. So again, I know only 9% are using spreadsheets, but we need to get that 9% flipped off of that. There's no need for that anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Ash, this question came in. Strategically, you might have a large group of people you need to send to a destination. How do you do it?
Great question. And, it does need to be handled different to a kind of more traditional. And again, you could be managing a program. You've got travelers coming from 100 plus countries trying to organize that. And the way that, I would handle it and that we handle it today is that we take a two-phased approach. Phase one is about the strategic planning. So let's get ahead of this. As soon as the event is known, even before that, even if you're trying to decide which destination might be appropriate, that's where a vendor can step in and help you plan for, especially from a visa and compliance perspective, where is the best place to hold that global seminar, global meeting, if you haven't quite decided on a destination. If you have, then it's really key to then look at what are the nationals traveling, where are they coming from, where are some of those pain points in terms of planning, strategic planning around appointments. When you look at visa wait times, transit points, all of this needs to be considered. It might seem simple on the face of it. We're organizing a meeting in Spain. We want to invite, 50 people, leaders from all over the world. Let's get them there. There's so many kind of pieces to that need to be worked through, and having the right strategic partner rather than just putting a portal in front of them and say, hey, apply for your own visa. You can centralize a lot of that. And then phase two is then procuring those visas where they're needed. So that is working centrally with, a designated individual from within the business that's coordinating to help collect documents, work with them on preparing documents, working with the travelers, kind of being that intermediary between the business and the travelers, alleviate the pressure from the organizer so they just know someone's on top of the visas because they've got enough to worry about in terms of booking everything else and organizing it, but also collating that documents, working with the travelers to procure those visas in, potentially hundreds of countries. So yeah, it really is a strategic approach to kind of group travel, and it's something that we're seeing more and more that companies are starting to host global retreats, in various countries, trying to bring in individuals from all over the world. It's a really great incentive, but it has its challenges, and that's where having a strategic partner that operates in a large number of countries can really help.
Definitely. Awesome. Appreciate you addressing that question. And then I realized, Peter, that the questions that you were addressing were in relation to Envoy Global and our services. As I was reading, I was a little bit confused because they came in when we were on the slide at the very end talking about that. So just wanted to also say that out loud in case anyone else. So yeah. Alrighty. Well, that looks like that is all the questions for today. And so I think with that, we will wrap things up a tad early, give everyone back a few minutes in their day. Peter, Ash, thank you so much for the informative discussion. To our attendees, thank you so much for joining us today. Final reminder, the recording will be emailed out before the end of the week, so please keep an eye out on your inbox for that. And so have a great rest of your day and have a great rest of your week. Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.